There is one detail in this Gospel which could escape attention. It is the fact that the Pharisees plot with the Herodians of all people. The word Pharisee is linked with the root paras, to separate. They were the separated ones. And the Herodians are those who are willing to collude with Herod, and therefore an impure strand of Judaism linked with the empire. And it is not acceptable for the pure Jews to do any kind of compromise of the sort. So the Pharisees are in this inconsistent with their own principles, but they are fighting a common enemy, the Lord, and so they're willing to go along with that. And we know, if we are attentive to the outworking of the Passion, that actually, of all people, Pilate is fully aware of the dynamics at work. It says at one point, for he knew that it was out of envy that he had been delivered up to him. And this power of envy is one of the fundamental dynamics of bad human behavior from the beginning of time. What happened in the case of Cain and Abel? There was envy there, the sacrifice of one being accepted and the other not. And of course he cut his throat. But it goes further to, of course, the devil himself. What happened there? Lucifer, being the brightest of all angels, became aware of his beauty and power, and this led to a fundamental sin of pride and rebellion linked with pride, self-sufficiency. And he was trying to get all the angels after him. And remember now, Michael was not the brightest angel. Lucifer was among the seraphim and was the brightest of all. So Michael was given greater power at that point. But this envy, the theologians tell us, come from what was seen at this pre-temporal test given to the angels. They were not going to be given the fullness of beatific vision unless they passed this. And the proof is going to be in being presented with the incarnation. Non serviam, I will not serve, I will not worship. Apparently a lower being, it would seem. And also the intuition was given that there would be a future even brighter. It was Our Lady. Hence we see this fundamental hatred and envy, aggressivity and violence towards anything to do with Our Blessed Lady, and indeed towards the human soul. Why could we get to the place that he has lost? Pure, rotten envy and spite. And do you know that human beings who end up on the wrong side, for instance, priests who have had the maximum in this world, can end up as human demons, and out of that same spite and envy, start playing the game of the wrong side. It's been found out in exorcism that one finds that there sometimes, human demons in there, and even priests, Judas and the like. Pure hatred, spite, to get as many as possible into the same mess. It's the same actual mentality as what Hitler had when everything was being lost. Remember the famous phrase, "Is Paris burning?" He'd given orders that all that they would find when ending up in Paris, the Allies, would be just a heap of ruins. Fortunately, Colonel Schortel was wise enough to keep on delaying, because he knew what was ahead, and he wasn't going to be responsible for history for doing it. At least that was one thing that one important German officer stopped. I make a jump. The demon has that same hatred towards every human soul, and will, until the end of time of testing at least, has been accomplished. Remember how Shakespeare, one of the great tragedies, that of Othello, puts it in 2 lines. Beware, my lord, of jealousy. It is the green-eyed monster that mocks the one it feeds. And how prevalent it is in human behavior. Just look around. I remember actually years ago in France, our prior coming up with this one day, describing the genius that you might find here and there in, for instance, well qualified burglars. On peut gagner beaucoup de mérite pour l'enfer. One can gain a lot of merit for hell. And so it is that many, through their life, specialize in doing harm. Become very good at it, become experts at it, reduce it to a fine art in many sectors of life, even, alas, in marriage. It's rather sad. Once before the altar, they promised before God and the angels and the community assembled to love and to cherish. Then one sees expertise in causing pain. But all this will come back at the Last Judgment. We're examined on what is specifically asked of us, and that means, it says, to love and to cherish, excluding all that pertains to the other realm, the smoke of hatred and violence, hell. So, this week we think about how Olnik is managing very well to obtain the means of grace. The Universal Church can be attacked. Why? Well, he wants souls. So he's clever enough to know how to get them. Destroy the church. Break it up in fragments. Divide and conquer. He's a good military captain. In fact, there's perfect obedience under him. We know that also from exorcism. Perfect obedience. One time, in an exorcism in the States, the exorcist was trying to find out who was in there. It turned out, Beelzebub! How is it that you're in there, not Lucifer? By order, Lucifer! Oh, I see. And he asked him what pious he belonged to. I belong to the highest order, the Seraphim. So there we are. That's what they lost. The pure hatred, therefore, of these high beings. So it came out in that exorcism how there's perfect order. They all have to obey Lucifer. And they're far more clever than we are. We're happily dozing to sleep, allowing him to reign in our homes by just turning a knob and enthroning Satan on the screen. Now, with regard to destroying the church, he's been at it a long time. He tried in the first 3 centuries through the Roman Empire. And we had all these martyrs. He couldn't. Then, when it became popular, after the Edict of Milan, 312, 313, there to become Christian, it brought in compromise, and he tried then to inquinate the church itself. He got the emperor, especially of the East, on the wrong side. He was a Christian trying to defend the church, but he messed things up by getting involved with Arianism or semi-Arianism. Very cumbersome to handle. Wasn't really sorted until the Council of Chalcedon in 451. And so, the first reaction, destroy unity from within. Then, destroy Rome, physically, the sack of Rome. We have all the outcries of Gregory the Great, Pope Leo the Great, Augustine himself, seeing what was happening. Then it carries on in the East, state and church hand in hand. And in the Eastern Church, much of the accoutrements of the bishop come from the imperial court. By the way, it explains how in the East they allow 1 second union before a priest in marriage when it has failed. It's because of the close link between church and state, and they were obliged to listen to higher authority on the state level. And theologians say that probably the second union is not sacramental, because it cannot be, because of the Lord's teaching. It's only a recognition of failure, what they call economia and epikeia, clemency, and working out the best we can in a messy situation, so as to avoid the person to be in a completely irregular state, even worse, without any touch at all with the church. I chose that parenthesis, but it explains a lot of problems. Then what happens? We have the very complex issue of what happens in the time of debate about one theological issue, but which is only the last straw. It's when, in the West, we started to add he proceeds from the Father and the Son, referring to the Holy Spirit, filioque, from the Son as well. The East wouldn't hear of it. It was not in the formula of Nicaea and Constantinople. There's no need to go into detail about that now, but what happened was that it was the last straw in already a cultural separation, and we had powerful heads in West and East, particularly in East actually, which really caused problems. And what they thought would be a pimple on the map is still there. Oh, we're always having bust-ups, aren't we? That was the way things were handled in those days. I excommunicate you, and you excommunicate me, and eventually we'll be shaking hands down the line. Nothing of the sort. It was only in 1439, on paper, it was healed for a short while. Why? Because the East was crumbling. It was the attack of Islam, and they could see what was ahead. Only with military help from the West will we save Constantinople, which was the new Rome for them. And they went, therefore, to Florence, and they had this council, East and West, and it was agreed that we would heal the schism, but it wasn't accepted in the East, so it's still there. A great victory for you-know-who. So he tried again. In 1517, Martin Luther started off as a good monk. Although the origin of his vocation is a bit questionable, it would seem that there was something to do with some kind of violent duel which took place, and he was sought by the law and took refuge in the monastery. We're not quite sure about that. Anyway, he was ordained a priest, and he was brilliant. I know because I've studied some of his writings, and you can see the evolution. A brilliant man who starts off very well, defending Our Lady and so on. And then something of the original sin of the enemy. Satan comes in, and the tone changes. That same independence of mind was in Satan himself, eventually. He refuses authority, and we have something of what the Lord here talks about, hardness of the heart, which grieves him in the synagogue. The hardness of the heart. It is self-sufficient and won't listen to counsel. And because he has a following, he goes his own way. And one of the great sufferings he has at the end of his life is that he sees that the very principle that he'd sown leads to its own destruction, because he finds others doing the same thing, using the same principle, interpreting scripture without authority from the church. And so we have now, by the thousand, more fragmentation, and each church more or less a little bit further from the origin, and usually a good few being born every year. They're not churches, by the way, they're ecclesial communions. You can only call a church one that has the episcopacy. Therefore you can call the church in Greece, the church in Moscow and so on a church. They have the apostolic succession. But you can't call the Anglican communion a church because they haven't got bishops. That's another issue, but it was defined by Leo XIII in 1896. Utterly null and completely void. No matter what they're wearing on their head or on their body, it changes not one iota. They haven't got the priesthood. So, that leads us to our time. He's trying again. This time, far more subtly. He's doing it now within the one true church, that same line, and he's doing it using his own. Using his own within. Have you heard of Bella Dodd? Well, she, before dying, made a confession to Archbishop Fulton Sheen. She had been involved for years and years in working for the wrong side, linked with communism, getting orders. She was to prepare as many as possible for the infiltration of the Catholic Church in seminaries. They were to be first-class candidates, so as to have eventually first-class jobs. She talks about around 1100, possibly more. And when she is coming to the end of her life, she is able to tell Archbishop Fulton Sheen they were getting to the highest places, and she was able to name to him 4 cardinals. So, we come now to 1962. In 1962, there took place an important event in the Vatican, underground. A full satanic rite. And by the way, a black mass does mean you have to have Catholic priests working to the wrong side, in which the Vatican was dedicated to Satan. So, what is going to happen? Old Nick, being the supreme angel, maintaining all his intellectual power, his reason is perfect, even though he is fallen, and his will is corrupt. He knows exactly how to attack the means of grace. And we were warned. We were warned about the same time, actually. Garabandal has it, and a little later in time, Akita has it. And we think that also the third secret of Fatima has it, but it was not fully revealed. That's another question. And the implication is that there was going to be this complete disgregation of the faith within the one true church, apparently, because of division amongst the highest authorities. Bishops against bishops, cardinals against cardinals. And we know that Sister Agnes at Akita was told that many, now listen, priests, bishops and cardinals were going to perdition and leading many souls after them. A few years ago, a holy priest, Joseph, in India, had a lethal accident on his motorbike, died for a while, enough to see the other side, and saw all 3 places. And in hell he saw what he never thought he'd see. Many priests and even bishops that he never thought he'd see there. And he was given to understand that the things that brought them there were the likes of leading the flock astray. He also saw homosexuals down there and perpetrators of abortion. Now, all this to say that we are right now only seeing the tip of the iceberg. We are happily rocked to sleep by the media, and we don't realize who is preaching at us.